Hi, this is Chris with Orange Coast College's Art Department, covering how to create a new file in Adobe Photoshop. This is primarily for new Photoshop users who don't know how to set up a file to begin working. So if this is you, keep following on. Now there's several ways to create a new file, and let's go through those one by one. First of all would be the way I'd recommend, which is to open Photoshop and go to the new file command in the file menu. So when we do that, it pops up this new document window, and you can see along the top we've got some tabs. It's looking at some of the recent sizes I've used. For digital painting students in OCC's Digital Hybrid Art Studio, I suggest that you pick 4K or UHD, and we can find that in film and video. So right here we see UHD, also known as 4K. So we can pick that guy, and that's 3840 by 2160. And landscape orientation is great. And the reason why I suggest this is the native resolution of our Wacom 24-inch Pro display tablets. It's also the resolution of our 4K display. So if we show things on screen, it's just the right size. Now you might notice a few other things. We've got our pixel dimensions, which is usually how you want to refer to your files, not in inches or centimeters or something like that, but in pixels. So that's usually the best way to refer to it. Resolution is not important. Don't worry about that. I know sometimes if you're printing things, you're concerned about your resolution, but what's really the most important thing is our pixel dimensions. Next on down is our color mode. So I suggest RGB color. 8-bit has always worked fine for me. You can up to 16 or 32-bit, but those are barely detectable by the eye, and they quadruple your memory overhead. So unless you find yourself really focusing on really subtle shifts in color and value, 8-bit should just be fine. And then when we open this, it'll fill our background with something. Could be white, could be black, could be your background color. It's not terribly important. If you're going to end up printing on white, go ahead and start with white for your background. But it's super easy to change. So again, not really important. If you end up using a resolution that you want to return to all the time, you can title it whatever you want and save it, and it'll be in your saved area. So for instance, I've got a tabloid vertical at 150 pixels per inch saved. But for our example here, let's do 4K. This guy right here, I'm going to hit create. And there is our new file. And if you take a look in our layers palette down here in the lower right, we've got a background layer. It's locked by default and it's filled with white, but we could easily fill it with that blue background color or the darker blue foreground color. Let's go ahead and leave it at white for now. So another way to start a new file is, let's say you have a file online. You have it in a web browser or in another application. So we can switch on over to my web browser here, where I can either control click on using my keyboard or right click from my mouse and hit copy image. And then let's switch on back over to Photoshop and go on up and start a new file from the file menu, much like we did before. But I would like to point out here, now that we have something copied to our clipboard, you can see our suggested size is that clipboard size, and that happens to be the size of the image we looked at, which is 2880 by 1800. So Photoshop reads the clipboard and offers to size the new file based on your clipboard contents. So I'm going to go ahead and say yes, I'm going to create to that size, and then when I come in here to paste, it will be exactly the size of that image. So take a look down here again at our layer palette, and you'll notice we have our background there with white as noted, and when we pasted, we have a new layer. And that happens every time you copy and paste into a file in Photoshop. Even if it's within the same file, if I make a selection, copy, and then I paste again, it'll create a new layer for the contents. So let's look at our third possibility, and that is we already have a file. We've saved it, it's on our hard drive, it's in a folder in the Finder, and here's an example here. I can drag this to my Photoshop icon, and it'll just open that file. So it opened that JPEG at its native resolution, which isn't all that big. Now, sometimes you may have your preferences set to open a .jpg in Photoshop, and you can just double click on that file. But sometimes your associations are with different apps, and Photoshop may not open. Another program like Preview might open it. So let's say you wanted to open that file. Let's try it a different way. And let me show you. If we went the first way, where we opened a file, this is the first one we created, and rather than opening the one from the hard drive, I'm going to try something new here. I'm going to just drag from my Finder window into my Photoshop open file. So when we get into Photoshop from dragging that file in, Photoshop offers to place that file at its native resolution, which is not much compared to the 4K resolution, right in the middle of my file. So I can accept that. I can, while I've got control handles, I can size or rotate, and then when I like it, I hit return. And for comparison's sake, let's take a look down here in the layer palette, and note on the layer preview, it's got an overlay of a file icon with a white box, this right here. What that means is rather than pasting the pixels from the clipboard, which that previous example did, this one is creating a link to that original file. And the nice part about that is if we come back and let's say I want to transform this again, and I do this several times, it doesn't degrade my image at all because it's linked back to the original, and so it'll always update that reference, which is great. Because if I just transformed this 10 times with regular pixels, each time would degrade those that image. So having this linked as what's called a smart object can be pretty handy. Now, you should know if you have a smart object, you can't do many things to it. So watch, if I decide I want to paint with this purple paint, it won't get it. I'm clicking on the brush, and when I actually go to paint, it pops up this warning box that says if I want to proceed, I need to rasterize the object. And that means taking away the reference to the original and turning it into straight pixels. So there's kind of no going back once I decide to do that. So if I decide to rasterize and now I paint and I say I don't like it, I could undo or go through history, but if I'm picking this up tomorrow, I can't go back and get that reference to the original. So that's a rasterized layer versus a smart object which gets pasted in with its reference. So those are several different ways to create a new file. I suggest that you start by figuring out which outcome am I concerned about. Am I going to show this on screen? Is this going to be a website graphic? Am I going to print it? And if I'm going to print it, what size print am I going to make? If you start there, then pick the resolution and the size that works best for you, I think that you'll be better off. Hopefully that helps you get off to a good start using Photoshop, and you can begin making some awesome artwork. Good luck.